The story begins with a haze of disorienting intimacy, where the boundaries between dream and reality blur into a suffocating heat. A man looms over the protagonist, his silver hair cascading around a face etched with a complex mixture of desire and frustration. He presses closer, his gaze piercing as he accuses her of dishonesty, noting that her body betrays the resistance she attempts to feign. This man, who by all narrative logic should belong to the story's heroine, is instead entangled with the villainess, his fingers tracing her lips with a possessiveness that contradicts the script. He confesses that her vulnerability, the specific way her expression softens into something cute, erodes his resolve to let her go. The protagonist, trapped in this bewildering scenario, tears up, overwhelmed by the sensory overload and the inexplicable affection radiating from the man who is supposed to despise her. He whispers a plea for her to stay with him until morning, addressing her as his beloved wife, a title that rings with terrifying dissonance in her ears. Despite the intellectual knowledge that this situation is fundamentally wrong, she feels a magnetic pull towards him, her own emotions betraying her logic. Suddenly, the atmosphere shatters. The man, Gilbert, pulls back, his face contorting as he verbally admonishes himself to pull it together, snapping the romantic tension like a brittle twig. The protagonist awakens abruptly, the transition jarring her senses. She finds herself alone, sitting up in a lavish bed, her mind reeling with questions about her location and the identity of the man who had just consumed her reality. The room is unfamiliar, a grand chamber that feels like a foreign mansion rather than her own sanctuary. As she gathers her bearings, a maid stands nearby, and the protagonist's eyes land on a man entering the room, clad in a pristine military-style uniform with silver aiguillettes. Her otaku instincts immediately flare, categorizing him as a 2D husbando, character of supreme aesthetic quality. He approaches with a stoic expression, offering a polite yet distant comment on her recovery. However, the warmth is illusory. Gilbert's demeanor instantly freezes into glacial indifference. He averts his gaze, turning his back to her as he delivers a cutting ultimatum. If she requires nothing further, she is to refrain from speaking to him entirely. The rejection is absolute, leaving her stunned in the silence of the opulent room. Desperate to escape what she hopes is merely a vivid nightmare, she pinches her cheek, wishing to wake up. She stumbles toward a large, ornate mirror, and the reflection that stares back freezes the blood in her veins. The face in the glass is not her own. The pieces of this surreal puzzle begin to lock into place. The maid refers to the handsome, cold man as Lord Gilbert, her husband. This confirms the protagonist's new identity. She has become Ilse Enfy, a duchess. The maid recounts the events leading to her unconscious state, explaining that Madame had clung desperately to the Lord, begging him not to go to work, and had fainted after hitting her head when he shook her off. This pathetic display triggers a flash of recognition. The protagonist realizes with dawning horror that she has been reincarnated into the world of the novel Cinderella's most beloved. She mentally catalogs the narrative landscape. In this story, she is the antagonist, Ilse Enfy, destined to oppose the protagonist Gilbert and the heroine Sheila. The original Ilse was a figure of immense privilege, a duke's daughter and the country's top healer, who abused her gifts to fulfill her own selfish desires. She wasn't merely a passive villain, she was a predator. The maid's recollections paint a picture of a woman who possessed no boundaries, barging into Gilbert's bath and bedroom naked, demanding attention. Her marriage to Gilbert was born of coercion. She had leveraged her healing magic to save his terminally ill mother in exchange for his hand in marriage. She ruled the household with tyranny, punishing any woman or maid who dared to interact with her husband. The protagonist shudders as she realizes the gravity of her position. If the plot follows its original trajectory, Gilbert will eventually meet Sheila, fall in love, and Ilse will escalate her villainy to the point of attempted murder. The retribution for these crimes is total. Ilse is exposed, stripped of her status, banished from the ducal family, and ultimately meets a tragic, squalid end as a prostitute in a brothel. This realization acts as a bucket of ice water. She refuses to accept such a pitiful conclusion to her new life. Determined to rewrite the script, she formulates a plan. Since claiming reincarnation would only invite accusations of insanity, she decides to feign memory loss due to her head injury. She tests the waters by asking the maid about her mother-in-law, feigning concern, a deviation from the original Ilse's behavior that confuses the servant but elicits a positive report. As she contemplates her next move, the door swings open, announcing a guest. A man with a flamboyant collar and a charming smile enters, greeting her with an affectionate declaration that he has missed her. This newcomer is Niall Godolphin, Il's older brother. He approaches her with a familiarity that catches her off guard, complimenting her appearance and calling her the cutest in the world. When she reacts with genuine fluster, he notes the anomaly, remarking that her shy reaction is unexpected given their usual monthly meetings. The protagonist quickly searches her memory of the novel's lore. Niall is destined to become a doting brother to the heroine, Sheila, once the truth of their birth comes to light. In the original story, Ilse and Sheila were swapped at birth, meaning Ilse is actually a commoner's child. Once this secret is revealed, the noble family who currently coddles her, including Niall, will abandon her without a second thought because of their obsession with social status. Despite this looming betrayal, Niall currently appears to be a supportive ally. He lounges on the sofa, casually suggesting that it is about time she breaks up with Gilbert. His disdain for Gilbert is evident, a remnant of the novel's original character dynamics. The protagonist seizes this opening. As a former otaku with no lingering attachments to her past life, she prioritizes her freedom and survival over a doomed romance. She decides that a peaceful divorce is her only escape route before the heroine Sheila enters the stage. She steels herself and drops the bombshell. She intends to divorce Lord Gilbert. To sell the narrative, she adopts a melancholic persona, clutching her chest and claiming that she simply wants to be loved, and realizing that Gilbert deserves a better partner than her. Niall accepts this explanation readily, his bias against Gilbert making him sympathetic to her plight. He pities her, reinforcing the idea that separating is natural. He pulls her into an embrace, promising to make her happy, though his comfort feels suffocating to the protagonist, who finds the intensity of the noble lifestyle stressful. Niall lays out the tactical plan. He advises her to return to the Duke's estate and propose the divorce to Gilbert directly. He assures her that given Gilbert's intense dislike for her, the proposal will not be rejected and the formalities could be concluded within 2 months. The protagonist thanks him, relief washing over her at the prospect of a clean exit. However, as she prepares to leave, Niall surprises her with a sudden kiss on the cheek, framing it as a farewell. He casually mentions that usually, she is the one who initiates such affection, a comment that sends a jolt of panic through her as she realizes just how clingy the original Ilse was. As the protagonist departs, worrying that her inconsistent behavior might blow her cover, the scene shifts to Niall left alone in the room. His charming facade drops, replaced by a sharp, calculating suspicion. He touches his lip, pondering the strange interaction. The Ilse he knows was obsessively attached to Gilbert, making her sudden desire for a breakup inexplicable. More damningly, he recalls that the real Ilse never referred to him as Big Brother, and actually harbored a dislike for his kisses. The discrepancy is glaring, leading him to question the identity of the woman who just left his presence. Oblivious to Niall's suspicion, the protagonist returns to the Duke's mansion with renewed resolve. She plans to use the transition period to study the world, specifically focusing on healing magic as a means to earn a living once she is independent. She envisions a simple, peaceful life as a commoner, free from the toxic nobility and her bad reputation. Exhausted by the day's revelations, she retreats to her room, collapsing onto the bed, eager for sleep. Her reprieve is short-lived. The door creaks open, and Gilbert enters, still dressed in his shirt and trousers. Before she can process his arrival, he advances on her with predatory speed. He looms over the bed, his shadow engulfing her, and pushes her down into the mattress. Panic flares in her chest as she demands to know what is happening. Gilbert's expression is dark, his eyes clouded with confusion and anger. He accuses her of placing a curse on him. When she denies the accusation, calling it a stupid lie, Gilbert's frustration boils over. He claims she is merely trying to grab his attention again. He reveals that his memory is fragmented. He recalls drinking something that acted as an aphrodisiac, causing him to fall ill and lose his memories. He asserts that the current situation is a result of that induced sickness, implying she manipulated him while he was vulnerable. He leans in close, his voice dripping with disdain as he tells her he is fed up with her lies and her unnecessary schemes. Yet his actions starkly contradict his words. He hovers intimately close, his breath ghosting over her skin. He declares that he will follow the terms of the contract, as promised, a statement that confuses the protagonist entirely. He commands her to shut her mouth, claiming her protests disgust him, even as he initiates physical contact. His fingers pry at her lips, silencing her confusion with a kiss that is both punitive and possessive. He begins to unbutton his shirt, his gaze intense as he tells her she should not ask for more than this obligatory intimacy. The protagonist is pinned beneath him, her mind racing to understand the contract he speaks of. The situation has spiraled out of control. She intended to propose a divorce, but instead, she is trapped in a physical encounter with a man who claims to hate her while seemingly unable to resist her. As Gilbert continues, claiming a curse is at play, she is left paralyzed by indecision, wondering desperately what the original ills did to him and how she can navigate this tangled web of forgotten promises and magical coercion. The heavy, suffocating heat of the bedroom presses down on Ilse as the reality of her situation becomes inescapable. Gilbert looms over her, his presence overwhelming and inescapable, disregarding her weak pleas to be let go. He commands her to stop moving, his voice tight with urgency as he insists they have little time. Ilse finds herself unable to shake him off, her strength failing against his overpowering physical dominance. He leans in, his face dangerously close to hers, and whispers a manipulative threat that binds her compliance. Surely she does not wish for her beloved husband to die young. The implication hangs in the air, transforming the intimacy into a coerced necessity rather than an act of passion. As he holds her, Ilse's mind whirls in confusion, questioning the necessity of such a tight, desperate embrace. Memory fractures into a haze. Ilse recalls the night only in disjointed fragments, a blur of being held repeatedly until consciousness slipped away. By the time morning light filters into the room, her mind is blank, swept clean by exhaustion, and her voice has been reduced to a hoarse rasp. She awakens with a start, a sharp cry of pain escaping her lips as sensation returns to her body. Confusion grips her as she processes the physical aftermath. Despite the maid's earlier implications of a marital life, Ilse realizes with a jolt that this encounter felt like her first time. The relentlessness of it, continuing until dawn, defies her understanding of a hateful marriage. She sits up, clutching the sheets, and tries to rationalize the anomaly. Gilbert, who supposedly detests her, seemed driven by an ulterior motive to embrace her with such intensity. The experience leaves her shaken, and she resolves inwardly that she never wants to endure such an ordeal again. The door opens and the maid enters, checking on her mistress. Ilse's thoughts immediately pivot to escape. She determines that a divorce is absolute necessity. However, the maid's reaction is unexpectedly cheerful. She beams, noting how wonderful it is that the master, who typically departs after a mere hour, remained with Ilse until morning. The maid questions if Ilse remembers, prompting Ilse to ask if these encounters usually end quickly. The discrepancy forces Ilse to probe deeper. She questions why Gilbert would perform such an act if their relationship is truly broken. The maid, confused by Ilse's apparent memory loss, reminds her of the grim reality governing their union. The marriage is bound by magic that affects Gilbert's lifespan. The terms of this binding magic were exposed long ago. To sustain his life, he is required to conceive, or at least engage in the act, twice a month. The horror of the truth settles over Ilse. The contract Gilbert mentioned is a curse, a magical shackle. She realizes the original Ilse used Gilbert's dying mother as leverage to force him into this marriage, creating a dynamic where he is physically compelled to touch her to survive. Gilbert had rightly called it a curse. Guilt washes over her. It is no wonder he hates her with such virulence. Yet, she knows that as the Duchess, an invitation from her is essentially a summons he cannot ignore. This knowledge solidifies her resolve. She must divorce him quickly to liberate them both. Nervous anxiety gnaws at her as she wonders if he will even make time to speak with her about the separation. But the meeting is granted. Ilse finds herself sitting across from Gilbert, who regards her with icy detachment, arms crossed and expression guarded. He cuts straight to the point, asking if she intends to discuss the divorce. Ilse struggles to meet his gaze, the memory of the previous night making it impossible to face him directly. Gilbert presses for a reason. Ilse gathers her courage and declares that she no longer loves him. She reiterates her desire to sever their ties, stating it is exactly as she said. Gilbert's eyes narrow in suspicion. He points out the jarring inconsistency in her behavior, noting that just yesterday morning she was desperately clinging to him and begging for a kiss before he left for work. He finds her sudden change of heart abrupt and questionable. He leans forward, invading her personal space once again. He suggests with a dark tone that perhaps he forced her to do something against her will the previous night. He asks, almost tauntingly, if the situation was not to her liking. Flustered and blushing, Ilse stammers that while she has complaints, that is not the core issue. She pivots to an apology, bowing her head and expressing regret for all the trouble she has caused him until now. She acknowledges that words cannot fix the past, but she firmly restates her wish for a divorce. She offers him her sympathy, claiming she understands his feelings even though the fault lies with the previous ills, and swears she will never get involved with him again. She believes this is what he wants, a clean break. But Gilbert's reaction defies all logic. He looks at her with a cold, unreadable expression and declares that he absolutely will not divorce her. Ilse is stunned into silence. Gilbert observes her shock and deduces that she truly does not love him anymore. Without offering an explanation, he stands up and abruptly ends the conversation, stating he is busy and must leave. Ilse calls out to him, bewildered by his refusal and the abrupt dismissal, but he walks out the door without looking back. Gilbert retreats to his office, where his dark-haired aide awaits. The aide questions his decision, pointing out that Ilse's proposal was the perfect opportunity to end the wretched marriage. Gilbert's face hardens into a mask of vindictive cruelty. He asserts that he will not let her have her way so easily. He reveals his true intention. He refuses to set her free until he watches her lose everything and fall into absolute despair. He is close to gathering the necessary leverage to corner her completely. His mind replays the history of her cruelty. He remembers how she withheld aid from his dying mother until she was on the brink of death, using that desperation to blackmail him into marriage. She had imposed one-sided conditions that stripped him of his dignity and freedom. In his eyes, a simple divorce is too merciful a punishment. He sits at his desk, pen in hand, dismissing her recent behavioral changes. He believes her calm demeanor is merely an act that won't last. His aide notes that she seems like a different person since yesterday, but Gilbert is unmoved by the observation. However, his internal monologue betrays a crack in his resolve. He thinks back to the previous night, labeling it a failure. His original plan had been to treat the encounter as a routine obligation, to get it over with quickly like usual. But he lost control. He couldn't stop. He attempts to rationalize his lack of restraint, telling himself he simply wanted to make her cry more, but admits that continuing until morning was excessive. A flicker of doubt enters his mind. He questions if it is possible he is being swayed, though he quickly dismisses the thought as impossible. He steels himself, reaffirming his vow to throw that woman into hell. He clenches his fist, determining that he will absolutely execute his revenge, regardless of the confusing physical pull he feels toward her. Ilse agonizes over the stalled dissolution of her marriage, her mind racing with the terrifying possibility that Lord Gilbert's refusal to sign the divorce papers is an act of calculated vengeance rather than mere stubbornness. She suspects he intends to keep her trapped in their union only to condemn her to a harsher fate later, punishing her for the villainous past she is trying to escape. The weight of the original novel's plot presses down on her, whispering of a future where she is stripped of her status, cast out to live as a commoner, or forced into a humiliating existence within a brothel. Time is a luxury she does not have, as Gilbert's destined meeting with the heroine, Sheila, approaches rapidly, signaling the beginning of Ilse's doom. Desperation claws at her, urging her to simply abandon the divorce papers and flee the estate immediately, but a magical binding tethers her to the Duke. The contractual magic governing their marriage mandates that they must attempt conception twice a month, a rule she cannot simply ignore. Breaking this pact prematurely threatens to sever the magic violently, potentially shortening Lord Gilbert's lifespan, a consequence her conscience will not allow her to risk. She chides herself for her own foolishness, feeling trapped between her desire for survival and her moral obligation to the man who despises her. She concludes that her only viable path to freedom is to find a way to safely dismantle the magic binding them, allowing her to escape without blood on her hands. Resolved to execute this plan, Ilse prepares for the day, her demeanor shifting from despair to determination. As she navigates the corridors of the mansion, she encounters the cleaning staff and offers them a polite, bright morning greeting. The reaction is instant and visceral. The maids flinch and freeze, their faces masks of terror, as the lady of the house typically ignores their existence entirely. The staff whispers among themselves, analyzing her behavior for hidden malice, convinced that her sudden politeness masks a cruel trap. In the tension of the moment, a maid's trembling hands fail her, and a large, ornate vase slips from her grasp, shattering loudly against the floor. Panic instantly seizes the servant, who drops to her knees, screaming apologies and expecting severe retribution for destroying one of Ilse's favorite belongings. The maid begs for her life, tears streaming down her face, terrified that this mistake will cost her everything. Ilse, however, remains calm, stepping forward not to punish, but to assist. She inspects the maid's hand, which was injured by the porcelain shards, and assures the trembling girl that she has no intention of harming her. Concentrating her energy, Ilse activates her healing magic, a skill she has been secretly testing. Light emanates from her palms, knitting the maid's flesh back together instantly. The maid stares in disbelief as the pain vanishes, leaving her hand flawless. Ilse dismisses the loss of the expensive vase with a wave of her hand, instructing the servant to prioritize her own safety over material objects. Ilse internally celebrates the success of her magic, confirming that her proficiency is indeed among the best in the country, just as she suspected. The servants are left stunned, watching their mistress walk away, unable to reconcile this act of kindness with the cruel woman they feared. Ilse's small victory is interrupted by the arrival of Lord Gilbert. He looms over her, his expression cold and unyielding, prompting Ilse to lament that his hatred for her has reached a level that genuinely saddens her. Remembering his strict decree that she must not speak to him unless absolutely necessary, she clamps her mouth shut and looks away, ignoring his presence to comply with his rules. This silence, however, seems to provoke him further. He demands to know if she is ignoring him, his irritation spiking at her lack of response. When she mentally cites his own rule as justification, he abruptly revokes it, driven by a sudden, inexplicable anger at her distance. He corners her against the wall, his hand slamming next to her head in a Cabotin maneuver, demanding she engage with him. He observes that she used to enjoy pestering him with conversation, and his aggressive proximity forces a reaction. Flustered and intimidated, Ilse surrenders, promising to speak if he will just back away. Once released from his intimidating stance, she hastily excuses herself, stating she has business in town, desperate to put distance between them and pursue her divorce strategy. Later, Ilse arrives at a secluded, ominous building, intent on breaking the contractual magic. Unbeknownst to her, Gilbert has followed her carriage, questioning why she would visit such a place and suspecting her of scheming. Inside the dimly lit room, filled with candles and occult items, Ilse confronts an old witch regarding the spell. The news is devastating. The witch reveals that the contractual magic cannot be undone for another 6 months. The old woman explains that the original Ilse had explicitly commanded the spell to be unbreakable and had threatened to behead the witch if she failed to make it so. Ilse recoils in horror, realizing that her past self's cruelty has trapped her in the present. The witch confirms that Ilse has no choice but to endure the current situation until the time limit expires. Ilse stumbles out of the building, her mind reeling with the implication that she must continue to share a bed with Gilbert twice a month for half a year. She is desperate to find another solution, refusing to accept a fate that endangers Gilbert or traps her in a loveless marriage. Gilbert, waiting outside, approaches her to ask about the divorce, but their conversation is cut short by catastrophe. A deafening explosion tears through the street, shattering windows and sending debris raining down on the civilians. The force of the blast knocks people to the ground, and smoke fills the air. Gilbert reacts instantly, shielding Ilse from the fallout, his face grim as he assesses the situation. He deduces that this is likely a terrorist attack orchestrated by a known criminal organization, though he admits he did not expect them to escalate their violence to this extent. Screams erupt from the smoke as the dust settles, revealing a street littered with the injured. Ilse stares at the carnage, paralyzed by shock. This event does not align with the novel's timeline she remembers, shattering her reliance on her foreknowledge. She hears the pained whimpers of the victims and scans the devastation, overwhelmed by the sight of bleeding commoners. Gilbert, maintaining the detached arrogance of a noble, advises her to ignore the filthy paupers and focus on her own safety. He turns to lead her away, but Ilse breaks from his grip. Ignoring his callous command, she rushes toward a man bleeding heavily from a facial wound. Gilbert calls out in confusion, but she is already kneeling amidst the rubble. She places her hands over the man's injuries and unleashes her light magic. The man's wounds close instantly, leaving him stunned and grateful. He stammers his thanks, but Ilse deflects the praise, her focus already shifting to the next victim. Gilbert watches from a few steps away, his eye wide with shock, unable to comprehend that the woman healing a dirty commoner is the same wife he has despised for years. Ilse surveys the street, her heart breaking at the sheer number of casualties. She sees small children crying among the wreckage, their bodies marked by cuts and bruises, and the sight terrifies her. Despite her fear and confusion about the altered timeline, she resolves that she cannot stand idly by. She moves with purpose, her dress stained with the dust of the explosion, while Gilbert's guards look on in bewilderment. Gilbert stands frozen, questioning reality as he watches Ilse move from person to person. He sees her prioritize the suffering of others over her own safety and status, a complete inversion of her previous character. Ilse turns to him, her eyes burning with determination, and issues a command. She demands that he guide her to the most critically injured victims immediately. She explains that triage is necessary to save as many lives as possible, even if she can only save a few. Struck by her authority and the urgency in her voice, Gilbert snaps out of his daze. He shouts orders to his knights, commanding them to identify the wounded quickly. He points out a direction, directing Ilse to where the casualties are clustered. Ilse rushes forward, healing a young boy held by his weeping father. The father weeps with relief as his son recovers, thanking Ilse profusely. Ilse offers a gentle smile, sweat beading on her forehead, and immediately asks for the next patient. Gilbert observes her, his internal monologue revealing his deep confusion. He struggles to reconcile the woman before him, exhausting her magical reserves for the sake of strangers, with the Ilse who once hoarded her powers solely for selfish gain. He directs her toward a fountain where more victims are gathered. Ilse arrives at the fountain to find a young girl crying over her mother. The woman is slumped against the stone, breathing in ragged gasps, blood trailing from her head and mouth. The child begs her mother to stay awake. Ilse kneels beside them, assessing the damage. The injuries are severe and deep, far worse than the others she has treated. She knows it will take time and significant energy to heal wounds of this magnitude. Undeterred by the difficulty, Ilse places her hands on the dying woman, tears welling in her own eyes as she empathizes with the child's terror. She channels a massive amount of light into the woman, declaring she will start treatment immediately. Gilbert stands behind her, watching the scene unfold with a complex expression. He sees the genuine anguish on Ilse's face and the raw power she is expending to save a life that offers her no political or personal benefit. He asks himself again what has happened to Ilse, the question hanging in the air as the light of her magic illuminates the tragedy around them. The physical toll of expending massive amounts of magical energy finally catches up to Ilse, manifesting violently as she coughs up a spray of blood. Her body trembles under the strain, prompting a concerned bystander to warn her that continuing this reckless healing could endanger her life. Ilse ignores the warning, her mind racing with the realization that she has completely depleted her magical reserves. As her vision blurs, panic sets in, and she internally apologizes to her mother, believing that she has pushed herself to the brink of death. Despite the agony, Ilse refuses to stop. She focuses her fading consciousness on the woman lying before her, the mother of the weeping child she encountered earlier. Light flows from her hands, knitting the woman's severe injuries back together. The woman stirs, eyes fluttering open, and gazes up at her savior with confusion, asking why a noblewoman would go to such lengths for her. Ilse, breathless and sweating, offers a rare glimpse into her internal motivations. She explains that after suddenly losing her own parents and becoming alone, she lived with the regret of not expressing her gratitude enough and being selfish. She confesses that she wishes she had shared more meals with them, burdened by regrets both small and large. Her actions stem from a desperate desire to prevent anyone else from enduring the same isolation and pain she suffered. The healing spell concludes successfully. The mother sits up, embracing her child who cries out in relief. Ilse, now barely able to stay upright, immediately asks if there are any other injured people nearby, her drive to save lives overriding her survival instinct. She finds a profound sense of happiness in this act of service, a feeling that contrasts sharply with the villainous role she inhabits. However, her body surrenders to the exhaustion, and she collapses backward. Lord Gilbert moves with lightning speed, catching Ilse in his arms before she hits the cobblestones. He calls her name urgently, his expression shifting from confusion to concern as he supports her limp form. Seeing her condition is critical, Gilbert leans in close, pressing his lips against hers in a desperate maneuver. He forces an emergency potion into her mouth, commanding her to swallow the liquid to restore her depleted magical energy. Ilse's eyes flutter open, and she instinctively swallows, her strength slowly returning. She pulls back, startled and flushed, realizing the intimate proximity of their faces. Gilbert straightens up, wiping his mouth, and explains clinically that he administered a potion designed for magical exhaustion. He informs her that there are no more seriously wounded civilians and orders her to return to the mansion to rest. He adds a softer comment, noting that he thought the action would ease her condition, displaying a rare moment of attentiveness. Ilse, touched by the gesture, offers a sincere smile and thanks him. As she is led away, She reflects on the warmth of the interaction and the deep fulfillment she feels from saving so many lives. The narrative shifts to the aftermath. Ilse sits hooded and disguised in the street, watching the commoners she saved, lamenting that she cannot even accept their gratitude properly because she is technically a villainess. Her thoughts drift to the heroine, Sheila, wondering when the original plot will take over. Ilse wakes up in her own bed, the soft light of morning filtering into the room. Her maid informs her that she has been asleep for 2 full days and that the doctor has already treated her for magical depletion. The maid excitedly reports that the town is abuzz with rumors about a mysterious noblewoman who saved countless lives during the attack. Ilse feels a pang of anxiety, realizing that these heroic actions completely contradict the personality of the real Ilse, who would never stoop to help commoners. Desperate to understand her predicament, Ilse asks the maid a strange question. Does magic exist that allows 2 people to switch bodies? The maid looks at her with bewilderment, laughing off the idea as impossible fiction. Ilse realizes she must remain silent about her reincarnation. If she tells the truth, she will simply be labeled insane and lose whatever credibility she has left. The door opens and Gilbert steps into the bedroom. He looks at her with an unreadable expression and offers a sincere apology. Ilse is baffled, asking what he could possibly be apologizing for. Gilbert clarifies that he is apologizing for his shameless request regarding his mother. Ilse's mind flashes back to the dark history between them. She recalls that the original Ilse took advantage of Gilbert's desperation to save his mother, forcing him into marriage and a physical relationship in exchange for using her healing powers. She realizes that her recent actions, healing the masses, likely triggered traumatic memories for him, as it mirrored the power dynamic he detests. She apologizes in turn, acknowledging that asking him to help her triage the wounded was cruel given their history. Gilbert interrupts her self-flagellation. He observes that despite the chaos, she showed no resentment and did everything she could to help. Ilse looks down, admitting that she simply wants to use her power for good now. She tells him she doesn't expect forgiveness for the past but insists that saving people made her truly happy. Gilbert stares at her, unimpressed by her humility, and simply asks, "So?" Ilse steels herself and outlines her plan for their future. She promises to find a way to break the binding magic that ties their lives together. She predicts that sooner or later, Gilbert will meet Sheila, and Ilse will become nothing more than an obstacle to his happiness. She asserts that when that time comes, he will want to divorce himself, and she intends to facilitate it with as little conflict as possible. She declares this is the path she has chosen and asks him to simply leave her alone until then. Gilbert rejects her proposal instantly. He steps closer, invading her personal space, and drops a bombshell. "Because I love you." Ilse is stunned into silence, unable to comprehend his words. Gilbert continues, stating that he intends to take full responsibility as her husband, admitting that he made her feel lonely in the past. He asks if she would believe him if he claimed to have changed. Ilse's internal monologue screams in denial. She refuses to believe that he has simply become a better person overnight. She panics, demanding to know why he is suddenly changing his tune. In a desperate attempt to push him away, she quotes his own past words back to him, reminding him that he once preached that a married couple should have real love between them, something they clearly lack. Gilbert does not retreat. Instead, he grabs her and pulls her into a forceful, passionate kiss, silencing her protests, page 29. He holds the kiss for a long moment before pulling back with a smirk, calling her reaction amusing. Ilse is left trembling and horrified. She interprets his actions not as affection, but as a twisted form of revenge. She believes that his hatred for her has warped him, making him toxic and resentment-filled. She concludes that a peaceful divorce is now nothing more than a fantasy. As she wipes her mouth, she realizes with dread that Gilbert has no intention of ever forgiving her. He intends to keep her trapped in this marriage to punish her. Ilse sits alone on the edge of her bed, her body heavy with the lingering exhaustion of the previous night. It marked the second occurrence this month that the restriction magic forced her and Gilbert into physical intimacy, a contractual obligation that leaves her feeling drained and hollow. She reflects on the experience, describing it internally as truly horrific in every sense of the word, a violation of autonomy mandated by a spell rather than born of affection. A flush rises on her cheeks as she recalls the sensations, a tear escaping her eye as she shudders at the memory of the coercive union. Her mind drifts to Gilbert, the man who shares this cursed fate. She imagines him lying beside her, sweat clinging to his skin, likely viewing their union as a well-deserved punishment for the villainess who trapped him. Ilse, however, feels detached from the original Ilse's crimes, finding the entire situation absurd and infuriating. An overwhelming anger fills her, directed at her past self for creating this hell, leaving her to drown in tears until the morning light broke. Despite her own suffering, Ilse possesses the empathy to analyze the situation from Gilbert's perspective. She realizes that if she were in his shoes, forced to interact with, marry, and be physically intimate with a person she loathed, she would feel an indescribable terror. She acknowledges that facing violent outbursts or being coerced into submission amidst a storm of unwanted love confessions would have caused her to lose her mind long ago. This realization solidifies her resolve. She cannot forgive the original Ilse for inflicting such torture, nor can she expect Gilbert to forgive her. Determined to break this cycle of misery, Ilse decides that her only remaining option is to hasten the meeting between Gilbert and the true heroine, Sheila. She reasons that if Gilbert falls in love with Sheila, he will finally find happiness, and she will be freed from the miserable nights dictated by the restriction magic, killing two birds with one stone. She recalls the geography of the novel, pinpointing that Sheila Ridley's house lies in a specific direction from the estate. However, a complication arises in her mind. Sheila is a kind-hearted girl. Ilse worries that if she gets too close to the heroine, Sheila might try to lend a helping hand when Ilse's eventual punishment and downfall occur, a kindness Ilse feels she does not deserve. Ilse prepares to leave the mansion to set her plan in motion, but she spots a figure monitoring her. It is Gilbert, standing stoically in the courtyard. She realizes he has assigned a guard to restrict her movements, a paranoid measure to keep her under control. She attempts to brush past him, claiming she is just going for a short walk, but he intercepts her. He comments on her appearance, noting that she seems to be in great shape despite the previous night, and demands to know her destination. Flustered, Ilse tries to decline his involvement, insisting there is no need for concern. Gilbert, however, remains unyielding. He states that he wanted to accompany her himself but is bound by other obligations, so he will have a guard escort her instead. His expression darkens slightly as he issues a warning. If she defies him again and ends up on the brink of death as she did during the explosion, it would be troublesome for him. He leans in, his voice dropping as he declares that he cannot allow anything bad to happen to his dear wife. Ilse is left stunned and repulsed by the endearment, internally scoffing at the ridiculousness of him calling her his wife given their mutual resentment. Accepting the escort, Ilse travels toward the town. She thanks the guard, who assures her that despite his unassuming appearance, he possesses excellent combat skills. Her thoughts wander to Niall, her usual shadow, who disappeared without her noticing, causing her to worry about his safety. Her mind then shifts to the larger mysteries unraveling around her. The perpetrator of the explosion is still at large, and she needs to investigate the criminal organization responsible, a threat that was never mentioned in the original novel. They arrive at a humble, rustic location. Ilse recognizes it immediately as Sheila's house, though she is struck by the modest conditions. She recalls the backstory. Sheila is actually a duke's daughter, switched at birth with Ilse, and needs to reclaim her rightful place as soon as possible. Ilse approaches the door and calls out, asking if she may speak with the resident. The door opens, revealing a beautiful young woman with flowing hair, Sheila. She asks who the visitor is, but before Ilse can answer, a voice from inside asks if they have a visitor. Sheila turns back and addresses the woman inside as Mother. Ilse freezes. She stares at the woman standing behind Sheila, the very woman she risked her life to heal during the explosion. A shockwave of realization hits Ilse. In the original novel, Sheila was supposed to meet Gilbert only after losing her mother and being left alone. By saving this woman with her magic, Ilse has fundamentally altered the future. Furthermore, because of the baby switch, this woman, Sheila's mother by upbringing, is actually Ilse's biological mother. The woman recognizes Ilse instantly. Tears stream down her face as she thanks Ilse from the bottom of her heart for saving her life. She recounts how she couldn't express her gratitude amidst the chaos of the attack and expresses immense relief just to see Ilse safe. Ilse is overwhelmed, realizing she successfully saved her own mother, and tears begin to well in her eyes, surprising her. Sheila joins in the praise, looking at Ilse with awe. She describes Ilse as a goddess who risked her life to save her mother, asking how she could possibly not be grateful. She marvels that a person of noble status would shed tears for a simple commoner they don't even know. Ilse feels a strange sensation, noting internally that her status seems to have skyrocketed in their eyes, and hastily tries to downplay her actions, insisting she isn't that amazing. The conversation shifts as Sheila probes gently into Ilse's motivations. She asks if Ilse came all this way today out of concern for them. She mentions that even the Duke, Gilbert, who helped save her seemed like a wonderful person. Ilse, flustered, admits that one could say she came out of concern. Internally, however, she chides herself. She originally came here to ask Sheila to please love my husband, but seeing them now, in this emotionally charged moment, she realizes she cannot say something so naive and insensitive. Instead, Ilse simply tells Sheila that she is truly happy to meet her. Sheila beams, responding that she is also happy to see Lady Ilse again. Ilse seizes the opportunity to bridge the gap between them, mentally noting that she never thought she would be talking to the character she always dreamed of meeting. She observes Sheila's enchanting presence, understanding why Gilbert and Niall would be captivated by her. She invites Sheila to drop the formalities and call her by her name. Sheila opens up about her life. She explains that her mother was her entire world and that she has always lived alone with her. She shudders to think what would have happened to her if her mother had died, confessing that she would have been lost. She thanks Ilse again, stating she doesn't know how she can ever repay her. Ilse insists that no repayment is necessary, as Sheila has already expressed enough gratitude. Sheila shakes her head, vehemently disagreeing. She claims she has nothing to offer Ilse, who seemingly has everything. Then, Sheila makes a confession. She reveals that she has admired Ilse for a long time and that Ilse has always been an inspiration to her. Ilse is confused, thinking saving her mother was just a recent coincidence. Ilse, misunderstanding the flow of conversation or perhaps projecting her own feelings as a reader of the novel, begins to pour out her own heart. She explains that she knew of Sheila long before they met. She reveals that seeing Sheila always striving, no matter the circumstances, gave her the strength to keep going. Ilse recounts her own past life implicitly, noting that when she lost her family and was left alone, Sheila was the guiding light that led her forward through the pages of the novel. She lists Sheila's virtues, strong, honest, devoted, and declares that is why she truly loved her. Ilse looks Sheila in the eyes and says, "I love you from the bottom of my heart." Immediately after the words leave her mouth, panic sets in. She realizes she sounds like a weird stalker who has been watching Sheila from afar. She stammers, trying to clarify that she didn't mean it in a strange way, but rather that Sheila doesn't need to repay her because she has already given Ilse so much hope. She apologizes, fearing her words were unsettling. Sheila stares at her, silence stretching between them. Then, slowly Sheila leans in. The gap between them closes until their faces are inches apart. Sheila closes her eyes, her cheeks flushed, and presses her lips against Ilse in a sudden, tender kiss. Ilse's eyes widen in shock, her hand hovering near her mouth as Sheila pulls back, leaving Ilse completely stunned by the unexpected development. Amidst a backdrop of emotional turmoil, Ilse finds herself ensnared in a moment of intense vulnerability, her heart pounding against her ribs as Sheila embraces her. The blonde noblewoman flushes deeply, overwhelmed by the proximity and the raw sincerity radiating from the maid who holds her tight. Sheila, tears gathering in her eyes, confesses that Ilse's words brought her true happiness because she harbored identical sentiments, admitting that thoughts of Ilse consumed her every day to the point of pain and frustration. Ilse stands frozen, her mind racing as she attempts to process the confession, struck by a jarring realization regarding the specific phrasing Sheila employs. The lines falling from Sheila's lips, professing that Ilse is beautiful, strong, kind, and righteous, are not merely compliments. They are a verbatim recitation of the dialogue Sheila delivered to Gilbert during the pivotal confession scene in the original novel. This cognitive dissonance leaves Ilse reeling, forcing her to question if the maid misunderstood a gesture of gratitude or if they are experiencing the psychological phenomenon known as the suspension bridge effect. Desperate to realign reality with her knowledge of the plot, Ilse attempts to interject and clarify the situation, stammering that there must be a misunderstanding. However, Sheila cuts through the hesitation with unwavering devotion, declaring that she is not mistaken and vowing to do anything if it is for Ilse's sake, asking permission to continue loving her. Later, under the shroud of a starry night over the castle, Ilse stands alone on a balcony, grappling with the catastrophic deviation of the storyline. She laments that her sole intention was to facilitate a meeting between Sheila and Gilbert, yet somehow, the narrative trajectory warped into a romance between herself and the heroine, threatening to dismantle the original plot entirely. Her introspection is interrupted as her memory drifts to an encounter with Gilbert in the corridor. In that memory, Gilbert, clad in his formal military-style attire, had caught Ilse as she staggered, offering to escort her to her room. However, the interaction quickly soured as Gilbert confronted her with accusations of infidelity, claiming he heard she was cheating on him in broad daylight. When Ilse denied the absurdity, Gilbert pressed further, revealing he witnessed her assistant engaging in physical contact with her. Ilse defended the embrace as a mere greeting between women, but Gilbert countered with a dark, suggestive inquiry, asking if they should incorporate such physical contact into their own relationship if it was truly so innocent. Ilse sharply rejected the advance, asserting there was no need for such intimacy between them. Focusing on damage control, Ilse turns her attention to the upcoming annual party at Duke Godolphin's estate, an event celebrating the wedding anniversary of her parents. Gilbert confirms his attendance for the following week, presenting Ilse with what she perceives as a golden opportunity to force the narrative back on track. She meticulously recalls the original novel's events. Sheila is meant to work as a day maid during this specific party, where she and Gilbert would fall in love at first sight, initiating a forbidden romance fueled by silent, exchanging emotions and deepening through chance encounters despite the class difference. Ilse acknowledges the tragedy woven into the original tale, the mistaken identities and the painful, mutual love that characterizes the story before its happy conclusion, and resolves to replicate the inciting incident. She secures a promise from Sheila to attend the party, a command Sheila accepts with a bright, devoted smile. Upon returning to her family's estate, Ilse is greeted by a scene of domestic bliss that borders on exclusion. Her parents are so wrapped up in their affectionate reunion, cooing over each other, that they barely register Ilse's presence. This oblivion comes as a relief to Ilse, who feared her parents might detect that the soul inhabiting their daughter's body had changed, but their focus remains entirely on one another. She navigates the halls, finding comfort in the familiarity of the home and her brother's welcoming presence, noting with relief that the domestic dynamic remains unaltered. Ilse reflects on her relationship with her brother, a man who had graciously brushed aside her apology for a previous explosion incident, claiming indifference to the damage. Leveraging his apparent leniency, Ilse had coordinated with him via letters to employ Sheila at the estate, positioning the heroine under the head maid to prepare for the critical party. However, a seed of unease takes root in Ilse's mind. Despite the drastic changes in her personality and behavior, her brother has offered no comment, maintaining a serene, unreadable facade. While walking through the opulent, chandelier-lit halls with her brother, he inquires about her plans leading up to the party. Ilse, internally frustrated that Gilbert currently views Sheila as merely a common girl, with zero interest, formulates a strategy to engineer the perfect meet-cute. She lies to her brother, claiming she wishes to quietly enjoy the estate after her long absence, while secretly planning to scout the grounds for the ideal location to stage the encounter between the lovers. Her brother, smiling pleasantly, insists on joining her for the walk, stating he simply wants to spend time with his dear sister. Ilse agrees, though she glances around nervously, unable to shake a sense of awkwardness. As they stroll, her brother abruptly notes the harsh change in her demeanor. He reminisces with a deceptively casual air about how the old Ilse used to cry and complain that he hadn't kissed her since the wedding. Ilse halts, confused by the incestuous implication, her internal monologue revealing that the previous Ilse had indeed engaged in such intimacies with him frequently. Her brother laughs off the tension, attributing his comment to the beauty of the season, while Ilse's attention snaps to a scenic spot in the garden, a perfect backdrop for romance. She fixates on the garden, mentally calculating the logistics of guiding Gilbert and Sheila to this specific location during the party. Her brother observes her intensity, noting that he was unaware she loved the garden enough to stare at every corner of it. Suddenly, the atmosphere shatters. Without warning, her brother's hand snaps out, his fingers clamping tight around Ilse's throat. The pleasant smile vanishes, replaced by a cold, menacing glare as he throttles her. Ilse gasps for air, tears pricking her eyes as the pressure increases. Leaning in close, his face shadowed and terrifying, he dismantles her charade with a single, chilling question. He demands to know the identity of the entity currently inhabiting his sister's body. Gilbert enters the opulent venue of the Duke Godolphin's estate, his presence commanding yet shadowed by a simmering irritation. He navigates the throng of high society, his mind fixated on the slight he perceives from his wife. She had warmly greeted her parents yet completely bypassed him, a deviation from her usual desperate clinginess. He rationalizes his annoyance by asserting his dominance, internally declaring his right as a husband to treat her however he wishes, considering she has always lived purely for her own selfish desires. As he scours the crowd, his gaze lands on Niall Godolphin, the Duke's son. Gilbert notes the dark rumors swirling around the man, whispers that Niall stops at nothing to crush those he dislikes and possesses an excessive obsession with social status. Gilbert's internal strategizing is cut short as the doors open and Ilse makes her entrance. The atmosphere in the room shifts instantaneously. Ilse descends, adorned in a gown prepared by her mother, radiating a brilliance that silences the murmurs of the aristocracy. Gilbert halts, physically struck by the vision before him. He observes her breathlessly, forced to admit that while makeup can alter a woman's appearance, the transformation before him is fundamental. She appears to be a completely different person. This visual shock triggers a cascade of realization within Gilbert. He recalls her request for a divorce and his initial dismissal of it as a mere ploy for attention. He had assumed this new, distant behavior was a mask that would eventually crack, revealing the obsessive woman he knew. However, faced with her genuine indifference and radiant independence, he confronts the unsettling truth: she has truly lost interest in him. A possessive instinct flares within him. He decides that the divorce is no longer a simple matter he can grant, resolving that the decision to end things belongs solely to him. Meanwhile, Ilse feels the crushing weight of the social gathering. Desperate to escape the stifling attention and execute her plan to save the storyline, she slips away from the main hall. She retreats to the service corridors, seeking out the one person pivotal to the novel's original romance, Sheila. Ilse finds the heroine amidst the other maids and urgently requests her presence in the garden later. Sheila agrees with a bright, compliant smile, but before Ilse can depart, Sheila creates a moment of intimacy. The maid asks permission to hug Ilse, a request she frames as bothersome for someone of her station, yet her eyes shimmy with anticipation. Ilse consents, and Sheila embraces her tightly, blushing deeply and confessing her profound happiness at the contact. Ilse stands stiffly in the embrace, bewildered by the romantic subtext that continues to deviate from the script, wondering why the narrative is warping in this direction. Later, under the cover of night, Ilse positions herself in the shrubbery of the estate's garden, intent on overseeing the meet-cute she has orchestrated. She realizes with a start that her brother, Niall, has followed her and is now lurking silently behind her. She ignores him, focusing her attention on the fountain where Sheila, looking ethereal in the moonlight, waits as instructed. The moment arrives. Gilbert approaches the fountain. Ilse holds her breath, waiting for the sparks of love at first sight, described in the novel, the endless gazing, the exchange of names, the start of a forbidden romance. She mentally urges them to interact. However, reality delivers a cold, anticlimactic blow. Gilbert walks past Sheila without breaking stride. Sheila stands still, looking downward. Their eyes do not meet. There is no spark, no conversation, and absolutely no interest. They drift past one another like ghosts, shattering Ilse's hope of restoring the original plot. As the failure settles in, Niall steps forward from the shadows, his voice dripping with analytical malice. He deduces that Ilse was attempting to engineer a romance between her husband and the maid to facilitate her divorce. He scoffs at the absurdity of the situation, launching into a deconstruction of the real Ilse's psyche. Niall reminds her that the sister he knew possessed a voracious greed. She wanted everything she saw, and even when she tired of her toys, she would never voluntarily hand them over to another. He points out the terrifying inconsistencies in her current behavior. The sister who called him Niall now calls him brother, the woman who obsessively loved Gilbert now pushes him away, and the aristocrat who despised the poor now risks her life to save them. The tension escalates into physical threat. Niall closes the distance, his hand finding her neck in a gesture that blurs the line between a caress and a chokehold. His eyes, devoid of warmth, bore into hers as he corners her against the garden's stonework. He dismantles her defenses, asserting that her transformation cannot be explained away by mere repentance. He poses the lethal question that has been festering in his mind. He demands to know the identity of the entity currently inhabiting Ilse's body. Ilse trembles violently, coughing as the pressure on her throat understands the gravity of her predicament. She realizes that Niall, the person who has watched Ilse more closely than anyone and harbors a deep, complex hatred for her, cannot be deceived. She understands that offering a flimsy lie now would result in her immediate death. Trapped, with tears streaming down her face and her breath coming in ragged gasps, Ilse surrenders to the inevitable. She apologizes brokenly. Looking up into the terrifying visage of the brother who knows too much, she whispers the truth that shatters her masquerade. She confesses that she is not Ilse's envy. A stark, undeniable confession that shatters the facade of identity. The truth finally surfaces, stripping away the deception that has held the atmosphere in a chokehold. The woman standing there is not Il's Enfi. A plea escapes her lips, begging the Duke to leave her be, as she acknowledges her role as the wicked wife. Niall, the silver-haired man adorned in a lavish military-style uniform, brings his hand to his face, his fingers grazing his lips as his sharp eyes bore into her. He deduces the reality of the situation with chilling precision, concluding that another soul has indeed entered Il's body. His reasoning is pragmatic rather than emotional. The healing magic she wields possesses a potency impossible for a fraud to replicate, solidifying her claim in his mind. The woman confirms his suspicion with a hesitant, trembling affirmative. Curiosity piques within him, and he presses for the mechanics of this anomaly, asking how such a displacement occurred. The scene shifts to the memories of the displacement, where the woman recounts the bewildering moment she opened her eyes to find herself trapped within this foreign vessel, a situation fraught with its own perils. She stands before him in an elegant, off-shoulder gown, clutching her chest as she explains the suddenness of the transition. Niall laughs, a sound devoid of warmth, noting that the original Il's was universally detested, which perhaps makes this usurpation less tragic in his eyes. He declares his belief in her story, accepting the impossible with unsettling ease. She elaborates on her condition, explaining that her knowledge of Niall and the others stems from the residual fragments of Il's memories that linger within the body. She carefully navigates the explanation, omitting the crucial details regarding the novel or the concept of reincarnation, choosing instead to present a simplified version of events. Niall listens, his interest piqued by the anomaly of her existence. He questions her lack of emotional volatility, observing that despite a stranger hijacking his sister's body, he feels neither anger nor sorrow. He muses that magic capable of such a feat shouldn't theoretically exist, yet the lack of rage within him perplexes him the most. Niall steps closer, his gaze predatory yet oddly appreciative. He labels her rebellious Il's, drawing a sharp comparison to the original. In his twisted estimation, this impostor surpasses the arrogant woman who previously inhabited the form. A chilling admission falls from his lips. Had she been merely a stranger with no connection to the vessel, he would have killed her without hesitation. Her survival hinges entirely on the fact that she possesses the same appearance, satisfying his obsession with bloodline. The protagonist internally dissects Niall's character, recalling the narrative of the novel where he abandoned Il's the moment he discovered she was a commoner, shifting his doting affection entirely to Sheila. She recognizes the insanity lurking beneath his composed exterior. Niall views people strictly through the lens of their bloodline, rendering him fundamentally abnormal. He bluntly states that he simply loves his sister who shares his blood, a declaration that underscores his dangerous narcissism. She realizes that as long as her true identity remains concealed, his twisted code of ethics ensures her safety. Niall moves to console her, instructing her to rest easy, promising his protection from this point forward. He sympathizes with the fear and anxiety she must have endured, pitying her plight. In a sudden, overwhelming gesture, he pulls her into an embrace, the physical contact asserting his dominance and claim over her as family. He invites her to confide in him, to ask for anything she desires. Held against his chest, the protagonist grapples with conflicting emotions. In this unjust world, Niall stands as the solitary figure who has extended kindness to her from the very beginning. Yet logic wars with gratitude. She knows, fundamentally, that he is strange, dangerous, and unworthy of her trust. Despite this intellectual warning, the emotional impact of being called family resonates deeply, soothing the loneliness that plagued her even in her previous life. She accepts his embrace, thanking him profusely. She requests permission to drop the formal speech and address him as brother, seeking to solidify the protective role he has offered. He agrees readily, asserting that she is no longer alone. He goes further, promising to assist her in completely severing all ties with that person, presumably her husband Gilbert. As they walk down the opulent hallway, light streaming in through large windows, she resolves to rely on him temporarily. She justifies this pragmatic decision by reasoning that if he intends to abandon her cruelly in the end, using him now is a fair exchange. She apologizes for her earlier strange request, finding solace in the simple fact that she wasn't executed on the spot. The narrative transitions to a serene garden scene, where the protagonist stands amidst the greenery, engaging with a maid. The maid expresses relief that Il's has returned to the place of her birth and upbringing. She mentions the Duke's account that his wife, Il's, was the one who saved her, and expresses joy at Il's ability to view the garden. The protagonist realizes this location is far removed from the start of any romance, a sanctuary of sorts. The maid inquires if Il's happened to meet Lord Gilbert, to which she replies in the affirmative. The protagonist expresses gladness that she could thank him for saving her mother. The maid, oblivious to the turmoil, remarks on Gilbert, stating that she always thought Il's husband was a very lucky man. She probes for any special feelings or occurrences, unknowingly touching a nerve. The protagonist walks away from the fountain, the sparkling water mocking her mood, as she internally laments the day as miserable in every conceivable sense. She recalls the biting criticism leveled against her. Leaving her husband and returning without a word characterizes her as a bad wife. Flashbacks of Gilbert intrude upon her thoughts. He appears with a deceptive smile, suggesting they return together. He recounts their journey, noting with a hint of accusation that they were apart even on the way there. He claims to have listened to her strange, incomprehensible request, labeling it cruel. The scene shifts to the claustrophobic interior of a carriage. Gilbert sits across from her, his posture relaxed yet imposing. He points out a deviation from their norm. Usually, when riding in a carriage, they sit side by side. This proximity, he claims, is necessitated by her habit of clinging to him and refusing to let go. With a cold, analytical detachedness, he observes that there is no need for her to sit next to him now. He challenges her memory, asking if her amnesia is so profound that she has forgotten even their physical dynamic. She admits that his assessment is somewhat true, a concession that prompts him to take control of the narrative. Gilbert decides to remind her of their previous interactions. He looms over her, trapping her against the carriage wall in a dominant display. He recounts a specific memory where she supposedly told him that if he didn't kiss her immediately, she would die. He describes how she leaned close to him, initiating the intimacy. In the present, he closes the distance, his face inches from hers. He presses a kiss to her neck, eliciting a startled gasp and a protest from her. He ignores her resistance, reminding her of her own words, that he could do as he pleased. The carriage becomes a cage of sensation. He kisses her deeply, the sound of their breaths mingling in the confined space. She struggles, begging him to stop, but he counters her pleas with a practical instruction to breathe through her nose. He pulls back slightly, looking down at her flushed, tear-streaked face. He critiques her performance, noting that she is bad at this despite her previous claims. He throws her past words back at her, recalling that she once dismissed a kiss as merely a greeting. The protagonist is left panting, confused and overwhelmed, questioning why this is happening. Gilbert reveals the cruelty behind his actions. His smile is sharp, devoid of warmth, as he explains his motive. He wanted to demonstrate exactly what it feels like to be touched by someone she doesn't want touching her. The realization crashes over her. This was not an act of passion, but a calculated harassment directed at the original ills. It was a punishment. Despite the violation, she attempts to strategize. She resolves to foster a connection between Gilbert and Sheila, believing that redirecting the narrative is her only escape. She convinces herself that his cruelty toward her is meaningless since she is not the true target of his ire. Her goal remains steadfast, to avoid him and secure a peaceful daily life. However, the reality of Gilbert's possessiveness contradicts her plans. A vision of him declaring that he doesn't want to be apart from his beloved wife for even a moment haunts her. The final image sees the couple amidst a bed of roses, picturesque yet suffocating. She internally screams the question that defines her existence. Where exactly is this peaceful daily life she is striving for? The chapter closes on her realization that the actions of the past ills have trapped her in a cycle of retribution and obsession. The atmosphere within the ducal residence shifts perceptibly as the fallout from the Godolphin Palace ball continues to ripple through high society. Ilse sits in a high-backed chair, an elegant, dark dress draping her form, as she stares at a stack of correspondence. Her maid stands dutifully nearby, confirming the relentless influx of invitations arriving daily without pause. The rumors regarding the wicked wife have mutated, transforming her notoriety into a morbid curiosity that the nobility is eager to consume. Ilse scans the letters, her mind racing with the strategic implications of this newfound attention. She acknowledges that connections are the lifeblood of survival in this world, essential for resolving future troubles or gathering intelligence. For the former lady of the house, who was universally reviled, this sudden opportunity to form ties with the Duke's family feels like nothing short of a miracle. She calculates her next move, deciding that the most advantageous battleground would be a gathering populated by women of her own age. Her finger lands on a specific invitation, the Anchor family's tea party. The choice is calculated. The Anchors possess a pristine reputation, and the siblings, Chris and Rose, are renowned for their beauty. This seems like a safe harbor to begin rehabilitating her image. However, her solitude is interrupted. Gilbert, the Duke, appears behind her, his presence looming and inevitable. He greets her with a welcome back, a domestic pleasantry that feels foreign and unsettling to Ilse, who notes that no one has ever directed such warmth toward her before. Gilbert sits beside her on the plush sofa, his posture relaxed yet dominating. He remarks on her rising fame, his tone laced with an unreadable emotion. When Ilse reveals her intention to join the Anchor gathering, Gilbert's reaction is immediate. He declares he will accompany her, framing it as fulfilling his duties as a husband. Ilse attempts to decline, asserting she can go alone, but Gilbert cuts off her escape route. He states he will go regardless, warning her to be prepared for his presence. Ilse internally deduces his true motive, surveillance. He intends to keep a close watch on her, likely distrusting her sudden shift in behavior. Resigning herself to his oversight, she pivots to practical matters, requesting permission to purchase a dress and prepare small gifts for the hosts. Gilbert grants this with a wave of his hand, telling her to take whatever she likes. The narrative shifts to the day of the event. The venue is breathtaking, a sprawling garden filled with white tables and lush florals, evoking the aesthetic of a fairy tale. Gilbert stands by Ilse's side, observing the scene with a faint, perhaps mocking, smile. He teases her, asking why she is laughing, to which she simply remarks on the beauty of the setting. Their arrival causes a stir. Whispers ripple through the crowd as guests react to the rare appearance of the Duke himself. Gilbert leans into the role of the devoted husband with theatrical flair. He loudly proclaims that he cannot bear to be apart from his beloved wife, for even a moment, a statement that humiliates Ilse as she perceives the mockery beneath his words. The hosts approach. Chris, the head of the Anchor family, introduces himself and his sister, Rose. Chris is polite, thanking them for the honor of their presence, while Rose hangs back, appearing shy and demure. Chris suggests a separation of the sexes, inviting the men to step aside so the ladies can talk amongst themselves. Ilse agrees gladly, eager to escape Gilbert's suffocating performance. The women gather around a circular table laden with tiered cake stands and fine china. However, the atmosphere instantly curdles. As Ilse sits with Rose and other noblewomen, the air becomes heavy with hostility. The guests begin to whisper, their fans barely concealing their disdain. They recount the sins of the old Ilse, public humiliations, flirting with her sister's fiancé, and acts of violence. The judgment is severe. They view her existence as troublesome and her presence as vile. Rose, dropping her shy facade, looks at Ilse with cold, sharp eyes. She asks Ilse directly what she thinks of these accusations. Before Ilse can maneuver through the conversation, Rose strikes. With a feigned laugh and a chilling, "My dear," she asks if these aren't all things Ilse once did to them. In a sudden, fluid motion, liquid splashes across Ilse. Rose claims her hand slipped, but the malice is palpable. The pretense of civility shatters. Rose laments that the old Ilse did unforgivable things and questions if she was invited solely to be slandered. Ilse does not retaliate. She absorbs the humiliation, stating calmly that it is fine and she will go dry her dress. She retreats from the suffocating table, leaving the toxic laughter behind. Ilse sits alone on a stone bench in a secluded part of the garden, the weight of her predecessor's legacy crushing her. She laments that she only wanted someone to speak with comfortably, but realizes that Ilse is despised wherever she goes. Gilbert finds her there. He approaches quietly, his expression serious. He reaches out, wiping her face with a handkerchief. He questions why she didn't answer back or defend herself against the women. Ilse, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes, admits that she believes the humiliation is simply karma for the past actions of the body she now inhabits. She apologizes for embarrassing him, but Gilbert does not scold her. He seems to agree with her assessment of karma. Composing herself, Ilse decides to fix her makeup and then offer a formal apology on Ilse's behalf before leaving. She moves through the mansion's corridors, intending to find a restroom. Suddenly, a figure intercepts her. Chris, the host who had been so polite earlier, slams his hand against the wall, trapping her. His demeanor has transformed completely. The welcoming host is replaced by a man consumed by rage and grief. He reveals that this ambush was orchestrated to get her alone. Chris confronts her with the specific crime of the past. He accuses her of abandoning his sister, leaving her immobile because the Anchor family could not pay the outrageous sum Ilse demanded for healing. He screams at her, asking what her obsession with money is, pleading that he would have worked his whole life to pay it if she had just saved her. A flashback manifests the cruelty of the original Ilse. In the memory, she holds a glass of wine, smiling sadistically. She tells Chris that if they cannot pay, perhaps they should just forget the sister, remarking that it would be better if she died quickly. Back in the present, Chris trembles with hatred. He explains that the old Ilse was truly the worst, which is why Rose despises her so deeply. The protagonist, trapped in this confrontation, feels a surge of empathy. She understands Chris's desperation to save his family. She acknowledges internally that while the original Ilse had the right to choose her patients and wasn't technically obliged to save everyone, the malice behind the refusal was inexcusable. Determined to break the cycle of hatred, Ilse makes a bold offer. She looks Chris in the eye and asks to try healing his sister now. She expresses a desire to use her power for good. Chris recoils, disbelief etched on his face. He accuses her of lying to escape the situation, unable to fathom that the monster who cursed his sister would now offer salvation. He shouts, asking how anyone could believe her. Ilse stands firm, swearing that she will do everything she can. The tension reaches a breaking point as a voice cuts through the hallway. "Your Grace?" The chapter concludes with this interruption, leaving the confrontation unresolved and the potential for redemption hanging in the balance. The air heavy with the aftermath of a violent confrontation. A stern voice pierces the silence, condemning the foolishness of those present, while the Duke stands as an imposing figure of authority. He confronts Ilse, demanding to know why she has returned after such a long absence, questioning her presence with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. The atmosphere is charged with hostility as the accusation hangs heavy in the air. She is suspected of assaulting a member of the Duke's own family, a transgression that carries severe weight. The tension escalates rapidly, with talk of summoning a military unit to deal with the perceived threat, bypassing the need for standard guards. Undeterred by the threats and the imposing atmosphere, Ilse maintains a stoic resolve. She does not plead for mercy but instead issues a clear, commanding request to be taken immediately to the Duke's sister. The scene shifts to a solemn interior where the mood transforms from aggression to penitence. A group bows deeply, heads lowered in a gesture of profound submission, offering apologies from the bottom of their hearts. It is revealed that Ilse had tended to the sister. Although the treatment required time, she successfully managed to heal the girl safely. Despite the successful healing, the sight of the sister's condition inflicted unbearable pain upon Ilse's chest, the marks of long-term suffering clearly etched upon the girl's body. Ilse confesses that she intentionally provoked the confrontation to stir up trouble, a calculated move to intervene. She acknowledges that her actions, regardless of the motive, were unforgivable, and she declares her readiness to accept any punishment the Duke deems necessary. The Duke, observing her contrition, instructs her to raise her head. Rather than condemning her, he issues a new directive. She must continue to be a pillar of support for his sister from this day forward. He formally accepts the apologies offered by both parties, de-escalating the situation. The Duke reflects on his own past, admitting that he, too, has committed terrible acts. Ilse listens, her expression shadowed by the lingering presence of the old Ilse, a persona she feels will never truly leave her. She anticipates a future marred by guilt, convinced that she will always suffer for who she once was. However, she resolves to face herself in her own way and keep moving forward, asserting that no one can remain calm when their family's life hangs in the balance. She questions the Duke's leniency, asking why he chose not to punish the others involved. The Duke turns to her, his expression softening as he gazes out at the horizon. He acknowledges that despite her self-proclaimed hatred for the persona of Ilse, she remains a kind person at her core. He confesses a simple truth: he was happy that she saved him. He describes himself as a hypocrite who will continue to be tormented by his own guilt, recognizing that it would have been easy for her to take pleasure in striking a woman she hated, yet she chose a different path. He recalls her words about balancing the scales, and praises the sentiment. Looking directly at her, the Duke acknowledges the bitterness she has suffered up until this moment. He invokes the saying that life is designed to balance its scales in the end. He assures her with conviction that what awaits her now is beautiful and full of happiness, a reward for her past endurances. Ilse, touched by his words, reasons that if this is true, then a multitude of good things must be waiting for him as well. She offers him her gratitude, a gentle smile gracing her features. The conversation shifts to a lighter, more whimsical tone as Ilse daydreams about what that happiness might look like. She enthusiastically suggests finding a destined partner and living happily ever after, her face flushing with excitement. The Duke listens with a deadpan, slightly exhausted expression, noting that it has been a tiring day. Ilse suddenly realizes a melancholy truth. In the end, she failed to make any friends. The Duke questions why she even wanted to make friends in the first place, seemingly perplexed by her social ambitions. Ilse reflects that there was no actual misunderstanding to clear up regarding her past reputation. She recalls Lady Rose's promise to explain everything to the other young ladies, hopeful that this might pave the way for normalcy. She fantasizes about simple social activities, like drinking tea with friends or going shopping for small, simple things. The Duke, hearing this, casually offers to accompany her himself. Ilse is taken aback, blushing deeply at the unexpected proposal. The Duke clarifies his offer with a playful condition. If that is all she desires, he will go with her, provided she is willing to listen to his complaints about his wife in return. Ilse counters with a condition of her own, asking if he would also listen to her complaints about her husband. They exchange a knowing, complicit smile, the banter establishing a comfortable intimacy between them as husband and wife. Ilse confesses that she was truly happy to spend time with him that day, thanking Your Grace, with genuine warmth. The Duke observes her smile, noting with a hint of surprise that she is capable of such an expression. Time passes, and the narrative shifts to the interior of the manor where Ilse is immersed in her duties. She presents a stack of finished paperwork for the month, requesting it be delivered. She reflects on her transformation from the old Ilse, who was known as a lazy freeloader, to her current self. Lately, she has taken on the simple but essential tasks of the lady of the manor, organizing documents and supervising the servants. Her competence surprises those around her, who never thought her so capable. Ilse attributes her efficiency to her experience working in office administration in her previous world. She efficiently manages her schedule, planning to head straight to a ladies' meeting after her paperwork, followed by treating a child that Lord Chris brought to her. A concerned maid observes Ilse, asking if she is okay and noting that she hasn't been sleeping well lately. Ilse apologizes, admitting that she has been overwhelmed by a combination of healing work with recovery magic, social activities, mansion duties, and her investigation into the binding magic. The maid questions why Ilse is overworking herself to this extent without regard for her own well-being, asking if she is trying to atone for her sins. Ilse explains that in her previous life, she lived without purpose, merely drifting through the flow of existence without direction. She confesses that, honestly, she is actually enjoying this busy, purposeful life now. Suddenly, the Duke sweeps Ilse up into his arms, carrying her effortlessly. He chides her, warning that he will ensure she doesn't cause trouble for others, implying that if she collapses, her hard work would go to waste. He insists on walking her to the carriage himself. His reasoning is protective. He refuses to hear again that she fell, hit her head, and lost part of her memory, a reference to the event that likely started her current journey. Ilse, nestled in his arms, wonders why he is doing this. Her heart flutters, a physical reaction that mirrors how she felt when she read the novel about him. She realizes that although he always says harsh things, deep down, he is a kind person. The scene transitions to the night, showing a snowy cityscape before moving to Ilse's bedroom. She collapses onto her bed, utterly exhausted. Her maid brushes her hair, urging her to get some rest. The maid points out a startling fact. Ilse hasn't taken a single day off in over a month. The realization hits Ilse with the force of a physical blow. Time has flown so fast that a whole month has passed since then. Panic seizes Ilse as she bursts out of her room, startling her maid. Her mind races to the binding magic placed on Gilbert. She realizes with horror that they haven't done it this month. The specific terms of the magic echo in her mind. The binding magic states that they must sleep together twice a month. The consequence of failure hangs ominously over her. If they don't fulfill this condition, something terrible happens. She sprints down the hallway, ignoring the maid's calls, her heart pounding loudly in her chest. A bad premonition grips her, a sense of dread that her fears were completely right. The chapter concludes with a shocking revelation delivered by a messenger: the Lord has collapsed. The atmosphere in the ducal chamber is heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets and physical frailty. Ilse stands over the bed where Lord Gilbert lies, her breath hitching in her throat as she processes the news of his sudden collapse. He rests against the pillows, his complexion pallid and beads of sweat marking his discomfort, Yet he attempts to dismiss the severity of his condition with a weak reassurance that he merely felt a bit dizzy. He insists that the situation is not serious, a transparent lie that fails to alleviate the guilt tightening Il's chest. She confronts the reality immediately, asking if his state is her fault, to which she offers a somber apology. Ilse calculates the passage of time, realizing with a jolt of dread that it has been over a month, perhaps a month and a few days, since they last engaged in the intimacy required by their magical bond. She scrutinizes his face, noting that his complexion has failed to improve, confirming her worst fears that his condition is critical. She internally chastises herself for her negligence, questioning how much of his lifespan has been drained away by her inattention. She realizes that the absence of Rita, who was on leave, contributed to her failure to notice the deterioration of his health. The gravity of the situation is rooted in the breaking of the contract magic, a binding force that explicitly mandates they must conceive a child, or at least engage in the act, twice a month to sustain him. She demands to know why he remained silent about his declining vitality. Gilbert averts his gaze, claiming he simply wasn't in the mood to hold her, but Ilse instantly recognizes the falsehood. She understands that he was prioritizing her schedule, lying to protect her from the burden of his needs because she was busy. This consideration confuses her. She recalls the Gilbert of the past, a man who engaged with the lowly whore, Ilse, every month without fail, regardless of her feelings. Memories of those forced encounters surface, times when she cried and refused, yet he proceeded anyway. The contrast between that brute and the man now showing her kindness creates a dissonance in her mind, leaving her unable to sort out her feelings of hatred and gratitude. Despite the emotional turbulence, Ilse suppresses her internal conflict and decides to act. She declares that she is going back to work, but this is a feint. Her true intention shifts as she realizes the urgency of the moment. Gilbert, perhaps misunderstanding her resolve or trying to push her away for her own sake, suggests she return to her room. Instead, Ilse crouches over him, her face flushed but her eyes determined, and announces that they must begin immediately. Gilbert stares at her, bewildered by the sudden shift. She explains with clinical urgency that they must move before his lifespan shrinks any further, asserting that there is no other solution to save him. The power dynamic shifts awkwardly as Ilse commands him to take off his clothes. Gilbert, retaining his sharp wit even in sickness, questions if she is truly asking an invalid to undress himself. He challenges her, essentially telling her that if she wants this, she must be the one to remove his garments. Ilse stammers, flustered by the reversal, realizing that she is accustomed to him taking the initiative and removing her clothes automatically. She acknowledges the embarrassment of the situation but accepts the necessity of taking charge. Gilbert complicates matters further by refusing to undress her in return. He claims that his sickness and lack of health prevent him from performing such a task, forcing the onus entirely onto her. He instructs her to take off her own clothes, watching her with a gaze that is both challenging and weary. Ilse struggles with the buttons of his shirt, her fingers working against the fabric as she exposes his chest. She justifies the indignity and the awkwardness by repeating a mantra in her mind. She is saving a life. It is a medical necessity, she tells herself, despite the intimacy involved. As she works, Gilbert observes her struggle and lets out a soft laugh. When Ilse questions his amusement, he disarms her by quietly admitting that her flustered face looks cute. The compliment catches her off guard, causing her to freeze. Gilbert, however, does not let up. He presses the advantage, reminding her that since she initiated this, she will be the one putting in the effort from this point forward. Ilse panics, asking what he expects her to do, to which he implies she must take the lead entirely. She protests that such a feat is impossible for her. Gilbert presents her with a cruel ultimatum. Does she want to ask for his permission every time, or expect him to take the initiative despite his condition? He guilt-trips her, reminding her that his lifespan will shrink even more if they delay, and crucially, that this entire situation is her fault. Ilse internally rails against him, thinking him evil for tormenting her even while he is on death's door. She resigns herself to the embarrassing farce, motivated solely by the fact that he is sick and his life is at risk. She vows to finish it as fast as possible to end the humiliation. The physical intimacy begins, but Ilse remains skeptical, believing that nothing will work unless the man is in the right mood. She leans in for a kiss, expecting it to be devoid of excitement. However, as their lips meet, the sensation defies her expectations. She doubts her ability to touch his body or escalate things further, hoping a kiss alone might suffice to trigger the magic or his arousal. To her shock, she senses him responding. He is getting excited from the kiss alone. The kiss deepens, becoming wet and intense, the sound of their lips parting filling the silent room. Ilse is struck by a sudden realization. Gilbert never kissed the original Ilse. This intimacy is new, specific to her, and it confuses her further. She admits to herself that the sensation feels nice, a betrayal of her earlier resolve to get it over with. Gilbert pulls back, his breathing ragged, and remarks that it seems she doesn't need any more preparation, implying she is ready. He teases her, asking if she really got to this state from just a kiss, while Ilse breathlessly counters that he is in the same condition. Gilbert whispers that this, too, is all because of her. He asks her what she will do to him next, forcing her to verbalize her intent or action. As the encounter reaches its peak, he calls out her name, Ilse, and she notes that he only ever uses her name during these moments of intimacy. She labels him an evil man, convinced he knows exactly the effect he has on her. Later, the room is quiet. Ilse sleeps beside him, exhausted. Gilbert remains awake, watching her slumber. He questions the reality of her transformation, wondering if a blow to the head could truly turn someone into a completely different person. He reflects on his past vows. He once swore to throw this woman into hell, no matter what. He admits that he used to feel disgusted with himself because of his association with her. He confesses to himself that he kept exhausting her and placing harsh demands on her as a form of self-punishment. But now he acknowledges a shift. Lately, his heart has begun to soften toward her. He finds himself apologizing to her sleeping form, asking for forgiveness. He realizes that he has started to see her as a gentle and loyal girl, despite everything that came before. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The lips he once heard speak curses he hated are now lips he finds himself kissing again and again. He feels he has become insane, losing his balance constantly when around her. He feels as though he is about to fall apart under the weight of these new emotions. The scene shifts to the following day or shortly thereafter. Gilbert sits at his desk, looking refreshed, while his steward, seemingly worried, asks about his health. Gilbert bluntly replies that after having sex with Ilse, he feels astonishingly better, calling the curse ridiculously absurd. The steward, maintaining his professional composure, presents a stack of documents to Gilbert. He explains that the lady reviewed all of the paperwork herself. Gilbert examines the work. It is not just a simple review. She has prepared a complete manual to simplify the work and increase efficiency. This competence strikes Gilbert as a massive anomaly. He recalls that the original Ilse was a woman who felt nauseated just looking at letters and hated effort and studying so much she had a maid forge her handwriting. The work before him now requires not only knowledge but experience to complete. This evidence solidifies Gilbert's doubts. He realizes that this cannot be explained away by a simple change of heart or memory loss. The discrepancy is too vast. He turns to his steward with a dark, serious expression, his suspicions deepening into a specific, dangerous theory. He commands his subordinate to find a method, specifically, a method that can replace what's inside a person. He is no longer just investigating a personality change. He is hunting for the mechanism of a total identity replacement.